an introduction to the 8th chapter of the book of Exodus. We have been going through the book of Exodus, giving the introductions to the chapter, and we will, of course, want to read this chapter in a few moments after we finish with this introduction. Exodus chapter 8. And Exodus chapter 8 gives us the narrative of the 3 plagues on Egypt. This is a triad of plagues on Egypt. These 3 plagues are memorable because not only do they constitute a repudiation of Egypt's form of worship, but also it is an insult to the objects, or we could say the targets of worship that the Egyptians adored. Each of these 10 plagues isolate an Egyptian god and demonstrate his or her powerlessness to affect or even diminish the well-being of the Egyptians, regardless of social status, from the pharaoh all the way down to the lowest commoner. Exodus chapter 8 is a chapter that deals with the swarm of frogs. Time magazine published an article written by Olivia B. Waxman, April 13th, 2022, and originally was in 2019. This particular article, I'm quoting in part, and this is what it says. This theory, put forth by scientists like John S. Marr, an epidemiologist who wrote a 1996 journal article featured in the New York Times, argues that red algae could have sucked oxygen out of Egypt's waterways, killed the fish, and turned the water red. Just as in the volcano theory, frogs then leapt out looking for food and died. Without frogs to eat the insects, the pests proliferated and feasted on corpses. A feeding frenzy for flies and locusts. The paper argued that the lice could have been a type of insect called colides, which can carry 2 diseases that could explain the livestock deaths: African horse sickness and blue tongue. The boils on humans could have been caused by glanders, an airborne bacterial disease spread by flies or tainted meat. In this theory, the darkness is coincidentally caused by a sandstorm. The darkness would have left the crops whatever crops were left after other problems, moldy, and the mold could have produced airborne toxins that might explain widespread childhood death. The first plague of the triad that is found in chapter 8 of Exodus is that of frogs. We find that in the first 15 verses. There was a very respected deity that was reputed to be in charge of frogs, which were in plentiful supply in the Nile River. That deity's name was Hapi. Hapi had an assistant, Hecht, frog goddess, which is related to fertility. There are images here of both of them. You will notice the frog goddess has a frog's head. She is colored in green because that is kind of the color of a frog. The image of Hapi is in yellow, but what I want to point out to you, and Let me get my cursor over here so you can see it. Here it is. Here's my cursor. Please take a look that this Egyptian god has a red belt and that he has a Dunlap belly. In other words, the belly Dunlap over the belt. Also, I want to point out to you that this particular god has female breasts. And you can see the breast figured right there. He is bringing food offerings to the people of Egypt, but that is because he is considered to be the great provider. Hapi was his name. Here is Hapi once again, taken from a frieze, and you will take note of the fact that here is his belly. It's poking out. You can see it there. And here is one of his breasts. The idea is that he not only would recommend to you what you should do to be wealthy and healthy, but that he partook of his own advice, and he had the fatness to show it. He had the fatness to show it in the belly, and he had the breast, which represented the conduit of the food source to the Egyptians. There are other things which characterize this god. There is what is known as the Osirid. You can see it here. Let me point it out here. And the Osirid is a ceremonial beard. The Egyptians had quite a fetish with keeping themselves shaved, but they realized that a beard was something that brought dignity to a man, and so a beard was often put on prosthetically. Hapi was the god of the Nile itself. He was the very incarnation of wealth and the symbol of the life-giving fertile mud over the fields. He was the one who controlled the flooding, and the flooding always brought silt, and the silt would then coat the riverside, which would become a very fertile soil. And so Hapi was considered to be the father and the provider of that fertility. He dwelt in a cave near the first cataract. Now, I'm calling your attention to the word cataract because this has to do with the Nile River. Now, we're not talking about those scales that form, or that thickness that forms over the human eye, called cataract, or cataracts in the plural. But we are talking about the waterfalls that are associated with the Nile River. Hapi lived in a cave on the riverbank where he was fed by crocodiles and frogs who wanted to assure themselves that the Nile should not run dry and make them die. So this is what was constantly in the mind of the ancient Egyptian, and so Hapi was looked at in that regard. He was always depicted as a pot-bellied man, and you've seen that. He was covered with blue, black, or green mud from the river, offering fruits and carrying the symbols of the two Egyptian kingdoms, the lotus and the papyrus. Lotus being upper and papyrus being southern or lower. His festival was held in all parts of Egypt in the late summer when the flooding would begin, and his popularity was, for obvious reasons, constant through all times. His wife was the goddess Nekhbet. Hapi's headquarters was somewhere in the first cataract of the Nile River. The Nile is the longest river in the world, flowing through almost a dozen countries. There's Burundi, Tanzania, Rwanda, the DRC, Kenya, Uganda, Sudan, Ethiopia, and South Sudan. Its three main tributaries are the White Nile, the Blue Nile, and the Athabara. I know that you've heard of the White Nile and you've heard of the Blue Nile, and you need to know that these are two tremendously large rivers that join, and they make the Nile River that dumps into the Mediterranean Sea. So there are three major tributaries. I'm going to show them to you on a map at this point. This is what they look like. First of all, with my cursor, my red cursor, this is the Mediterranean Sea. This is Turkey. Here's Saudi Arabia. You can read that on the map. And Cairo is this kind of like a block right here, straight line that divides Egypt from Sudan. Okay, so now let's take a look at the geography of the river itself. And we're going to do that by getting over to it. Let's take a look at the tributaries. Here you have the capital of Sudan, Khartoum. Our country has experienced a great deal of violence in Khartoum in this last week. Some of our embassy personnel were fired upon, and if I'm not mistaken, some of them were fatally injured. Here's the Athabara River. The Athabara River is right here where my cursor is floating. It's a few miles to the north of Khartoum, but it's close enough where it makes a confluence even greater of the Nile River. The two other tributaries are the Blue Nile, which is right here, south of Khartoum. You can see me moving my cursor up and down. And then there's the White Nile, which comes up this way. Now, the Nile River is one of the four rivers that actually flow to the south, which is an interesting detail. But I wanted to call to your attention these tributaries. Now, we are going to be talking about the first cataract, and that first cataract is found right here where you see the term or the name of the village or the city Aswan. The Russians built a big dam there. Here's the picture of the dam, or the legend of the dam. And as a result, you can see that there is a lake that has now grown. And it grows all the way to the Wadi Halfa. So this is a very interesting piece of river here, and I want to call your attention to it. Now the first cataract is in Aswan. Now I know that many of you have been to Las Vegas and you've seen the Luxor building there, the big huge pyramid. It is a casino that is built with an Egyptian motif. Here is the city of Luxor. It is very close to the city of Dina. Well, or Kina, we can call it, but I just want to call your attention to that. The Nile River has 6 cataracts. Basically, they're waterfalls. The first of this is the Aswan, and I'm giving you the coordinates just in case you want to follow it or find it on Google Earth. It's 24.078 north, those are degrees to the north, and 32.878 degrees east. You put these 2 points together and you're going to get to the first cataract. The second cataract, sometimes referred to as the Great Cataract, was in Nubia and is now submerged in Lake Nasser. Lake Nasser was that area of water that I was showing to you in the earlier slide. The third cataract is around Tombos slash Hannock. The fourth cataract is in the Manasir Desert and will have been flooded by the Merwo Dam since 2006. The fifth cataract is near the confluence of Adabara, and the sixth cataract is where the Nile cuts through the Sabaluka Pluton near Bagrawiya. Now these are the six cataracts. The one that we're the most interested in is cataract number 1, which is this one here. And maybe I can get that. This one here, Aswan. Okay. Here's a map that has these particular cataracts so that you can see them. So let's begin with number 1, which is Aswan. You can see the number 1 right there. And you can also see that there is this Lake Nasser there. Number 2, we have the second dam, which has already been flooded and is under that lake. The third cataract is Dongola, which is down here. The fourth is Napata, and Napata is number 4, number 5, and number 6 is Menroe. So way down here at the bottom, then you find Khartoum. Now, the corner legend here shows you what part of Africa we're looking at, and this is to give you an orientation. The god that we're talking about lived in this area here, Aswan, where the dam is today. The first cataract is characterized by a lot of boulders and islands that squeeze the river into a whitewater obstacle, which is impossible to navigate, and at the same time provides a delightful oasis-like area on the sides of the river. It is an absolutely gorgeous place. It is a tourist center, and if you have the chance to go to Egypt and to visit, then it would be your benefit, and it would be delightful to you to visit this place. The first cataract is where and I'm going to call it quote unquote fantasy island Elephantine is located. Now I call it Fantasy Island because in the ancient days it was believed that this was the headquarters of the gods. One of the headquarters. They weren't all simultaneously. There was one in one place and another one in another place. So this one was one of them. And as a consequence, there are some very elaborate temples which have been constructed there. It is a very beautiful place. It has greenery. It has nice breezes that come off of the river, so that even though it's hot and sunny, it is also cool during the day. Across the river from the island is where the famous Cataract Hotel is located. Agatha Christie wrote her bestseller, Death on the Nile, while she waited for her husband to join her. She stayed at the Cataract Hotel. Now, let me point the Cataract Hotel to you, and it is this building right here. And if you were to look on Netflix or Hulu or one of those streaming platforms, look up Death on the Nile, the 1978 version, and you will see this building over and over again. It is a very posh hotel. Across the river is the Elephantine Island, which contains all those beautiful temples and has much in the way of mythology attached to it. Now, you can see that the river has been divided and that the island divides the river. But apart from that, and you can see in the next photograph, that there are large boulders or large rocks that make it impossible for ships to navigate through this strait. As a result, this first cataract formed a very strategic defense post for Egypt. It had the Mediterranean on the north, had deserts on the left and on the right, and then it had this cataract on the south. Egypt was so well protected. In the mind of the ancient Egyptian, the Nile turned into a gentle provider of agricultural products and the wealth that comes from that. When the water from the southern part of Africa would hit the cataracts, it would churn and turn into white water. And so the water is boisterous. It's hard to navigate. It's white water. But then when it goes through the first cataract, which is the last before you hit Egypt proper, it calms down, the waters flatten out and get wide, and it is there that when what they call the happy, which is the annual inundation, the inundation brings silt and it washes over the banks and it makes the soil more fertile than ever. Year after year after year, it is extremely predictable. So you can see why when the plague of frogs hit, that the Egyptians had actually more than they could chew, because their god Happy was not doing a good job. The sudden proliferation of frogs was duplicated by the Egyptians. Exodus chapter 8 and verse 7 says, the magicians did the same with their secret arts, making frogs come out of the land of Egypt, coming up on the land of Egypt. Moses covered all the land of Egypt, while the magicians were only able to have frogs emerge from the river. And so I want to call attention to this contrast. Yes, the magicians could coax frogs to come out of the Nile River, but then they would only be along the bank. Moses had the whole land of Egypt covered with frogs. Now, the land of Egypt was primarily riverside land, but as you would move away from the river, there was still good land, good real estate where people lived, and even the frogs got that far out. Now, in verse 22 of Exodus 8, by implication, we know that the plague of frogs also occurred in Goshen, which is where the Hebrews lived. That was very far from the river. But the frogs got all the way out there. So what this shows, in essence, is that the magicians were able to get frogs, but they were just kind of weak tea. But when Moses brought frogs, he was steeped. It was bitter, and it was a lot. The magician said to Pharaoh, "This is the finger of God." Why? Because they finally understood that they had run out of power. However, Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he would not listen. just as the Lord had said that he would do. Verse 19, taken from the NIV. I like this particular picture. It's the hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil type thing. And the point that we have here is that even the frogs would be doing this. Okay, now we come to the fleas and the lice. This would be plague number 3. This is 3 out of 10. The Hebrew word for fleas or lice is the word cane, like sugar cane or the cane that you use to walk with. The word is cane. This word is an adaptation from an older word which has the sense of fastening. Now, this probably does not paint the very accurate picture for you, so let me give you a little bit better picture. There are these little insect critters that cause Lyme disease. We call them ticks. Their method of operation is that they cling to the lower parts of a plant so that when an animal is walking by, the tick will leave the plant and associate itself with the fur of the animal. If the one who is walking by happens to be a person, it will attach to his clothes, or if the person is wearing shorts, it will attach to his skin. This fastening is what is talked about with the Hebrew word cane. Letter B. KND, which is my abbreviation for Kylan Dalich. Those of you who know Hebrew know that this is one of the supreme authorities in the Hebrew language. Quotes Ewald, one of the Hebrew scholars. These were not lice, but they were, and here's the word, skinnyphase. Skinnyphase. This is a species of gnat that is so small as to hardly be visible by the eye, but with a sting, which according to Philo and Origen, causes a most painful irritation to the skin. They even creep into the eyes and nose, and after the harvest, that is the agricultural harvest, they rise in great swarms from the inundated rice fields. These little critters will get into the corner of your eye, lay their eggs, and then you will get some form of an eye disease. If you're stung by these, you will have an irritation where they sting. The word that is used, cane, can refer to a gnat because it infixes its sting. What the infixing of a sting means that it doesn't just poke, it pokes and leaves the stinger. So, bees are like that, but not wasps. This one infixes. And so the very tiny little stingers of these gnats would irritate the skin something awful. This word is used only in the plural. It is pronounced lekinim. The Hebrew word translated gnats in our Bibles has the im suffix or ending. Often when a Hebrew word ends with im, it means that the word is a collective, not just a plural. This is a collection of winged, biting, stinging insects. Like the Hebrew word, our English word gnats is actually a broad term referring to wing-biting and non-biting insects. We have an entire gamut of gnats, mosquitoes, sandflies, or even lice. One Hebrew writer or one Hebrew scholar writes that he thinks that it was the stinging type of mosquito. By bringing the plague of gnats upon Egypt, the impotence of Pharaoh and his magicians was demonstrated. They could not replicate the miracle of God by creating gnats from the dust of the earth. Thus, this plague indelibly impressed on the Egyptian mind that this plague was the finger of God. Gnats were considered ceremonially unclean by the Egyptian priests. The priests of Egypt took pride in that they were physically pure. They shaved their heads, dressed in beautiful robes, and unlike the Egyptian population at large, they washed frequently. Gnats, swarms of them, greatly disturbed their ability to keep religiously pure. Now we come to Seb, or Geb, as it is sometimes spelled, the earth god of Egypt. Geb was the Egyptian god of the earth. He underwent several spelling changes over the years. Sometimes it's Seb, sometimes it's Geb. Geb was a mythical member of the Ennead of Heliopolis. An Ennead is a council of 9, and in this case it was 9 gods. He could also be considered a father of snakes. He was believed in ancient Egypt that Geb's laughter created earthquakes and that he allowed crops to grow. The creation of gnats from the dust of the earth could not be duplicated by the Egyptian magicians. Exodus 8:18 says the magicians tried with their secret arts to bring forth gnats, but they could not. So there were gnats on man and beast. Verse 19, then the magician said to Pharaoh, this is the finger of God. In other words, they attributed the acts to God. This particular plague of the fleas or the lice, by implication, also occurred in Goshen. Goshen is where the Hebrews were living. The fourth plague is difficult for us to appreciate because of the similarity with plague number 3, flies and gnats. But it differs in that plague number 3 seemed to be a cloud of pesky insects, whereas plague number 4 seemed to be the endless attack of predator insects. What is known today as the ichneumon fly. The ichneumon fly. The ichneumon fly is represented as by the god Uatchit. Uatchit. Well, Exodus 8:21 through 23 says this out of the King James Bible. Else, if thou wilt not let my people go, behold, I will send swarms of flies upon thee, and upon thy servants, and upon thy people, and into thy houses, and the houses of the Egyptians will be full of swarms of flies, and also the ground wherein or whereon they are, and they will sever in that day the land of Goshen, in which many people dwell, that no swarms of flies shall be there, to the end thou mayest know that I am the Lord in the midst of the earth. And I will put a division between my people and thy people. Tomorrow shall this sign be. Here in these verses, we have the very, very stern and solemn promise of God. There are certain flies which were associated with certain gods. The ichneumon fly was considered the manifestation of the god Uatchit. This fly drills into the bodies of other insects and embeds its eggs. The larvae feed on that insect, eventually killing it. Though fearsome in appearance, this fly, or wasp, was desired and has been desired by farmers. It limited the number of other crop-destroying insects. The ichneumon fly, or wasp, is a predator. It has a stinger that can grow to 4 inches long, and it is hard enough to bore through tree bark and solid wood. The miraculous plague was unmistakably against the Egyptians. They could not deny the fact that they were on the wrong side, serving the wrong gods. Flies were used as rewards. A victory necklace was one of the most sought-after awards. This necklace was made up of 3 gold flies, called the Order of the Golden Fly. This necklace served as a military decoration given by the Pharaoh to his elite soldiers. Now I would like to ask you to turn in your Bibles, Exodus chapter 8. Okay, let's take a quick read of this chapter, and hopefully the points that we went through will penetrate. Now, I'm going to touch on this a little bit next Sunday, or the next time that we have a reading on Exodus, so be prepared. Exodus chapter 8 and verse 1. Then the Lord said to Moses, Go to Pharaoh and say to him, Thus says the Lord, Let my people go, that they may serve me. But if you refuse to let them go, behold, I will smite your whole territory with frogs. The Nile will swarm with frogs, which will come up and go into your house and into your bedroom, onto your bed, and into the houses of your servants, and on your people, and into your ovens, and into your kneading bowls. So the frogs will come up on you, and your people, and all your servants. Then the Lord said to Moses, Say to Aaron, Stretch out your hand with your staff over the rivers, over the streams, and over the pools, and make frogs come up on the land of Egypt. Aaron stretched out his hand over the rivers of Egypt, and the frogs came up onto the land of Egypt. Verse 8. Then Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron and said, Entreat the Lord that he may remove the frogs from me and from my people, and I will let the people go, that they may sacrifice to the Lord. Moses said to Pharaoh, The honor is yours to tell me, when shall I entreat for you and your servants and your people, that the frogs be destroyed from you and your houses, that they may be left only in the Nile? Then he said, Tomorrow. So he said, May it be according to your word, that you may know that there is no one like the Lord our God. The frogs will depart from you and your houses and your servants and your people, and they will be left only in the Nile. Then Moses and Aaron went out from Pharaoh, and Moses cried to the Lord concerning the frogs which had inflicted upon Pharaoh. And the Lord did according to the word of Moses, and the frogs died out of the houses, the courts, and the fields. So they piled them in heaps, and the land became foul. But when Pharaoh saw that there was relief, he hardened his heart, and he did not listen to them, as the Lord had said. Verse 16, Then the Lord said to Moses, Say to Aaron, Stretch out your staff, and strike the dust of the earth, that it may become gnats throughout the land of Egypt. Now, look at this word become, because that is very, very significant. Verse 17, They did so, and Aaron stretched out his hand on the staff and struck the dust of the earth. And there were gnats on man and beast. All the dust of the earth became gnats throughout all the land of Egypt. The magicians tried with their secret arts to bring forth gnats, but they could not. So there were gnats on man and beast. Then the magician said to Pharaoh, This is the finger of God. But Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he did not listen to them, as the Lord had said. Verse 20. Now the Lord said to Moses, Rise early in the morning, and present yourself before Pharaoh as he comes out to the water, and say to him, Thus says the Lord, Let my people go, that they may serve me. But if you do not let my people go, behold, I will send swarms of flies. Let me pause here for a moment. Chapter 8 has the repeated phrase, Let my people go. Literally, it's send my people away. And so in verse 21, you have this play on words. If you do not send my people away, I will send swarms of flies on you and your servants and your people and into your houses. Houses of the Egyptians will be full of swarms of flies, and also the ground on which they dwell. And so here you're able to see the play on words that is being used. Now verse 22, and this is a very important verse. Please mark it in your Bible. But on that day I will set apart the land of Goshen, where my people are living, so that no swarms of flies will be there, in order that you may know that I, the Lord, am in the midst of the land. Now, if you look at verse 22, you will see the phenomenal truths that are there. And that is that God separates his people from that judgment. Verse 23, And I will put a division between my people and your people. Tomorrow this sign will occur. Then the Lord did so. And there came great swarms of flies into the house of Pharaoh, into the house of his servants, and in the land was laid waste because of the swarms of flies in all the land of Egypt. Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron and said, Go, sacrifice to your God within the land. But Moses said, It is not right to do so, for we will sacrifice to the Lord our God what is an abomination to the Egyptians. If we sacrifice what is an abomination to the Egyptians before your eyes, will they not then stone us? Verse 27, we must go a 3 days journey into the wilderness and sacrifice to the Lord our God as he commands us. Pharaoh said, I will let you go, that you may sacrifice to the Lord your God in the wilderness, only you shall not go very far away. Make supplication for me. Then Moses said, Behold, I am going out from you, and I shall make supplication to the Lord that the swarms of flies may depart from Pharaoh, his servants, and from the people tomorrow. Only do not let Pharaoh deal deceitfully again in not letting the people go sacrifice to the Lord. So Moses went out from Pharaoh, and he made supplication to the Lord. The Lord did as Moses asked, and removed the swarms of flies from the Pharaoh, his servants, the people. Not one remained. But Pharaoh hardened his heart this time also, and he did not let the people go.